Antarctica. A frozen continent at the end of the Earth. Almost devoid of animals and plant life. But millions of years ago, it was a land of great dinosaurs inhabiting a lush, forested ecosystem. Here, agile Antarctic predators hunted fleet-footed prey. This huge continent was also a refuge for hardy beasts that survived a great mass extinction. And giant pre-dinosaur reptiles weighing over a ton. Into this lost world travel a team of scientists, hoping to unearth the secrets of Antarctica's mysterious past. To venture into the most challenging place to search for fossils on Earth. Over a decade ago, the last fossils of a dinosaur were removed that helped change the idea that Antarctica was just an inaccessible land of ice.
This has been one of the most fantastic experiences of my life, even though it was the most difficult.
Incredibly, it was the largest carnivore of the early Jurassic found anywhere on our planet. And it was unearthed in the southernmost continent that was once thought, only 100 years ago, to be devoid of all prehistoric life. After the discovery of Cryolophosaurus came more discoveries, like Glaciolosaurus. Even evidence that the largest dinosaurs on Earth had used Antarctica as a land bridge. But how did ancient forests, plants, and prehistoric animals thrive in a polar continent that endures 4 months of complete darkness every year? And how did some Antarctic creatures survive an extinction event that destroyed life on other continents? Ultimately, how did dinosaurs come to rule the lost world of Antarctica? To get to the ends of the Earth, the scientists prepare in Christchurch, New Zealand, the established stepping stone to the frozen continent. Dr. Nate Smith, along with Dr. Patty Ryberg and first-timer Dr. Libby Ives, will join a group of a dozen scientists for a summer expedition to the Transantarctic mountains. Nate was last here in 2011, hoping to emulate the success of that decade-old mission.
It's always exciting, when you get to Christchurch and you're here at the CDC gearing up, and it feels more real that you're about to head down to Antarctica and get to the field.
All solid and hazardous waste generated within the United States Antarctic program is shipped off the continent for recycling or proper disposal.
Dr. Patty Ryberg, expert on prehistoric plants, is on her third trip to Antarctica.
We have to have walkie-talkies on us all the time, so make sure you leave one of your pockets available for your walkie-talkie.
For me right now, Antarctica is this big unknown, and when we are issued all the gear and you get your big red, and just all the possibilities are kind of crazy right now.
Shackleton on 3. 1, 2, 3. Shackleton!
The exposed rocks of the Transantarctic mountains around their glaciers are the prime locations for fossil hunting.
This time I'm really excited about going to the Shackleton Glacier, which I've never been before, and it is such a kind of famous site and famous area for historic Antarctic exploration, but also for, paleontology, even the past 50 years or so.
Remarkably, this huge continent froze over completely only 15 million years ago. The ice sheet would cover the whole of the United States of America. Wind speeds and low temperatures unrivaled anywhere on Earth.
It's crazy to think about how much ice there actually is on Antarctica. The continent itself is a little over 14 million square kilometers, and about 98% of that is covered with ice.
But the story of how the ice world was created starts way back in the past, 300 million years ago. Then, the world was dominated by a supercontinent called Pangaea. This stretched from the northern to the icy southern hemispheres. At this point in history, Antarctica's ice sheets are melting as Earth is experiencing early global warming. By 250 million years ago, this polar world has turned from an ice house to a greenhouse, and gradually splitting into two great continents, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. But it's not populated by dinosaurs. That's to come. Its forests and swamps harbor weird and wonderful predecessors. Including the most common creature of the era, a tough plant eater as big as a mid-sized dog called Lystrosaurus.
They're found all over Gondwana and had been discovered in Antarctica in the late 60s and the 70s. So they would have had two kind of tusks in the front of the mouth and a little bit of a beak as well, a short stumpy tail, and very stocky limbs.
Giant amphibians thrive here too. Before the age of crocodiles, they occupied a similar niche, with a bite to match. They preyed on smaller animals such as Lystrosaurus. Lystrosaurus belonged to a group of mammal-like reptiles that eventually evolved into full-blooded mammals. These small creatures played a key role in the theory of plate tectonics. Five decades ago, the idea that great continents drifted incrementally was not fully accepted in science. Antarctica's Lystrosaurus were great proof of this, as fossils were also found thousands of miles away in southern Africa.
So when that was first found, the first Lystrosaurus back in 1970, that was a big deal because plate tectonics was just coming into its own. And here we have an animal, exact same animal in Africa and Antarctica, and that was a big impact.
You see that animal in South Africa, Antarctica, India, China, Russia, maybe Australia. This animal could clearly not traverse oceans, and so this animal must have been able to walk to all of those different places.
As more and more evidence mounted finding the same species of plants and animals in Antarctica that we were finding in the other southern continents. That was kind of the last nail in the coffin for doubters of plate tectonics as a theory of how the continents had been arranged in the past and are still moving today.
Antarctica is the hardest place on Earth to explore for fossils. Most of it is inaccessible, with huge ice sheets covering the surface. But in places, the frozen rock juts up from the ice, which is why the Transantarctic mountains are the destination for many expeditions. But still, its secrets are buried in frozen rocks in challenging places. Bill Hammer, now retired, spent 5 decades exploring this incredibly dangerous and challenging lost world.
The first couple trips are tough. You're out there isolated with just a handful of people, but if you're with the right people, you have to choose the right people to take to Antarctica. I learned that a long time ago. Because there are some people that are very good scientists, but they aren't good, wouldn't be good in Antarctica.
Oh, you've been great people. We love you.
Nate Smith was once Bill's student, but this season, he's a co-expedition leader. One of their goals is to solve the mystery that has puzzled experts since the first discoveries of fossils there. How do animals like Lystrosaurus and plants survive in a complete polar darkness of winter? Despite the continual movements of continents, Antarctica has never strayed much beyond the polar circle, which sees darkness descend for 4 months a year.
One of the enduring mysteries of Antarctic paleontology is what these ecosystems and communities were like that were living at high latitudes in a polar light regime.
The expeditions always take place during the precious summer months. An incredible 24/7 of sunlight, giving them as many daylight hours to work as they want. After a few days preparing in Christchurch, it's time to leave.
Antarctica is probably one of the hardest places to look for fossils in the world. And a lot of that is because of the logistics of getting down there and working on the continent.
Hey guys.
It's a 6-hour flight on a U.S. Air Force cargo plane from Christchurch, New Zealand, to the icebound continent. Perched on the southern tip of Antarctica's Ross Island, U.S.-run McMurdo is its largest science station. This base of 1,200 people will be their home for a week as they prepare for a trip to Shackleton Glacier.
It kind of feels like it's a cross between a remote mining outpost and a small liberal arts college.
And it's built to withstand terrible storms. Out in the field, scientists face real dangers.
Because Antarctica is so isolated and the climate and weather can be so severe, it is a dangerous place to work, and you have to take a lot of safety precautions and go through quite a bit of training.
One of the biggest are crevasses, gaping holes that can open up without warning. All field scientists have to learn how to climb out of them if they fall.
Even in those warmest months, you can get storms moving in, really high winds, really extreme temperatures. So we have special training that we go through before we go further out into the field. learning some crevasse training, some ways to traverse glaciers, all with the mind of keeping alert and being prepared for those conditions.
Living under canvas will soon be their world for 6 weeks. As a reminder of what faces them out in the mountains, a big storm strikes Antarctica.
We had some bad weather that slowed us down in getting out to our camp. We obviously can't be flying during those times.
Everything they need will be taken for their 6 weeks in the treacherous Transantarctic mountains. Storm over, they're transported deep into Antarctica. Now, they're really on their own, hundreds of miles from the nearest help and thousands from civilization.
It does in some ways feel like you're setting foot on another planet.
Their mission is to understand the planet's most momentous extinction event 250 million years ago. They're aiming to get to a once notorious ridge on Shackleton called Collinson Ridge. With decades of experience, Bill Hammer was on hand to provide advice to Nate and his team before they left.
The hardest place to get to, which will be one of your best localities, is Collinson Ridge. We found some good stuff there, but we only got there twice because it was so hard to get to. We had to go all the way out to the Shackleton, go all the way down here, about a 45-minute snowmobile ride, and then it was a good hour climb up to get to the top of the ridge.
Helicopter transfers now make it one of the most accessible places for fossil hunting.
A lot of the places we go, when you go there, you're the first people that have ever been there. That's the amazing thing. The other amazing thing about it is, if there's no wind and you're away from the rest of your party, total silence. You cannot experience total silence anywhere else that I've been. And so it's kind of neat. It's kind of eerie a little bit, but it's pretty neat.
They split into small teams. The sedimentologists find themselves in an exposed mountainous outcrop that recorded a key geological event.
All of this is lower Triassic, so you're looking at something that's younger than 252 million years, and it's all just trapped in time as the record of that flood event, which is kind of cool.
So somewhere between where I'm kneeling now and about 30 feet above me, 70 to 90% of the plants and animals all around the world just disappeared.
The Permian-Triassic boundary marks what paleontologists call the Great Dying. 70% of land animals died out, and 95% of marine life, all due to a widespread collapse of forests, plants, and nutrient ecosystems. It was a catastrophe for planet Earth.
So the end Permian mass extinction was massive. So this is very much kind of life coming close to the edge and, a fundamental reshaping and reorganization of communities.
The expedition to Antarctica probes the roots of this period before and after.
Yeah, that looks like a leaf.
Perched at 6,900 feet, Pete Makovicki and Akiko Shinya have found a Lystrosaurus fossil embedded in the frozen rock.
We are in the process of quarrying a fossil we found this morning. We think it's a Lystrosaurus, but that's an educated guess based mainly on the size of the specimen.
This discovery is yet another piece of evidence that Lystrosaurus was still around after the Great Dying.
It's a survivor lineage, one of the few lineages of terrestrial animals that survived the Permian mass extinction event.
But how did it survive? And what was Antarctica like afterwards? Throughout the world, forests collapse as a new, hot, toxic Earth takes hold, devastating for life everywhere. Across Siberia, massive volcanic lava beds were spewed out of the Earth's mantle, covering an area half the size of the USA to a thickness of several miles. This activity released enormous levels of carbon gases that warmed global temperatures to levels on average 18 degrees Fahrenheit higher than today, too hot for most animals to survive.
And ultimately led to a complete reorganization of ecosystems. We also see a general change in plant communities so that we don't have forests right after the boundary.
Only the very hardy and adaptable survive. Ancestors of the cockroach, of course. And Prolacerta, a lizard-like creature that preceded dinosaurs and crocodiles.
Prolacerta is about 250 million years old. It's one of the first animals you find after this Permo-Triassic mass extinction. Its name means, before lizards, but it's actually a dinosaur and crocodile relative. It falls on that lineage of reptiles. So in some ways, it's the closest thing that we have to a dinosaur from the early Triassic.
Excavating animals from frozen rock is the toughest challenge in paleontology today. Scientists have long focused on parts of the world where extraction and access has been easier. Often bones are stumbled on by accident. Antarctica's lost world had been hidden on a continent largely inaccessible to humans. A little over a century ago, no one had any idea that Antarctica was once covered in forests and roaming prehistoric animals. So what changed? The arrival of its first explorers to the region. The first clues were discovered by explorer Robert Scott in 1912. Scott and his team were trying to reach the South Pole when they stumbled upon rocks with leaf fossils imprinted on them. Despite the extreme conditions, the explorers hauled them back from the South Pole. But as history records, Scott and his team died before reaching safety, with the Glossopteris tree fossils later found on a sled near their bodies. This changed our view of Antarctica and geological history.
I always find that a really amazing story as a paleontologist, that these guys found this stuff and they recognized its importance for telling the story that Antarctica was a very different place with a very different climate in the past.
The discovery of these few poorly preserved leaves meant forests had once covered this great continent in warmer times. But how did forests survive at the extremes of polar latitude, where it was dark for months? Scott only found leaves on Antarctica, but fossilized trees on a close neighbor may provide some clues to help solve this mystery. New Zealand was once much closer to the frozen polar continent than it is today. It was once part of ancient southern Gondwana, joined to Antarctica and Australia. Around 83 million years ago, New Zealand broke away, attached to its own tectonic plate, and drifted out into the southwestern Pacific, bringing with it a biological cargo of primitive animals and plant life.
So what are we looking for?
We're looking for fossil wood.
To help with their quest, paleobotanist Dr. Patty Ryberg and sedimentologist Dr. Libby Ives visited a very rare example of 170-million-year-old fossilized trees in the South Island, New Zealand. Could these unusual preserved trees be a time capsule and a window on ancient Antarctica?
Oh, Patty,
Yeah.
look at this one.
Oh, wow, look.
Among the tide pools are petrified trees.
How tall do you think these things got? Like, is this the whole length?
No,
Or
no.
Okay.
This is just the main part of the trunk.
It's one of the very few places on Earth where we have a fossil forest in the exact same spot as when they were alive. So even though they're 170 million years old, they actually haven't moved from where they were when they were living trees.
These forests probably grew at or near the polar circle when New Zealand was thousands of miles further south. For certain, Antarctica's trees had to survive months of polar darkness.
These are plants that like to grow when it's dark for 4 months and the sun never sets for 4 months. So how do plants, they don't do it today. So how do plants actually manage to keep alive and survive? So we've got this really long tree here.
Sure.
Oh, and if we come down here, you can actually see the rings.
These rings show evidence that the tree grew to be about 90 years old and went dormant during periods, like an extreme version of winter today, where a chemical is released by the tree to drop its leaves and suspend growth. Could this be a polar winter strategy or part of a normal winter variation? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. On Shackleton Glacier, Patty has found more ancient preserved trees in the frozen rocks.
I did some studies on the tree rings down here, and basically they go, and they go, and they go, and then they stop. Right quick. It's almost instantaneous.
Variation in their tree rings indicate these periods of extreme dormancy, where growth stopped very quickly compared to today. But it's not the complete answer to the mystery. Modern plants and trees won't survive this stress and will probably die during months of complete darkness. So how did they spring back to life with such long periods without photosynthesis? One plant with an ancient lineage could help. The ginkgo tree. Sole survivor of the Triassic period and a direct descendant of its prehistoric cousin, solves this mystery. Scientists put ginkgo plants along with others in experimental greenhouses to imitate the polar summers and winters. To mimic the polar environment during the Cretaceous, they experimented with another ingredient, carbon dioxide. The Great Dying Event at the end of the Permian raised CO2 levels stratospherically. During the later Cretaceous period, they were still 2 times higher than they are today. Remarkably, the ginkgo plants survived the experiment. It did this by sucking up more energy in the test summer, enough to offset the trauma of the test polar winter as it went into dormancy. The higher CO2 levels appeared to be key to their survival. Evidence that the Glossopteris trees stumbled upon by Scott were destroyed by the Great Dying is clearly evident even in Antarctica today.
We go from having wood all over the place in these floodplain deposits to having no wood at all.
But by the Middle Triassic, other plants, such as the ginkgo's ancestors, had returned. The toxic environment that had killed off so many creatures dissipated, to be replaced by subtropical forests, rivers, and waterways, allowing new aquatic types of creatures, fearsome amphibians, to occupy predator and prey niches. Collections of fossils cut out of the frozen rock in the 1980s by Bill Hammer and others painted a new picture of a recovering Antarctica during this period, including a giant amphibian as big as a crocodile, not found anywhere else on Earth. Called Antarctosuchus, it took over 2 decades to piece together and identify.
I was fortunate enough to be able to describe with Bill an animal called Antarctosuchus, which has the skull length of, it's probably almost 2.5, 3 feet long. So the whole animal must have been about 10 feet long. If you saw it today, you'd think it looks sort of like a giant salamander, but these are the animals that are very common in the Middle Triassic of Antarctica.
In fact, the most diverse group of animals that we find that survived the greatest mass extinction in Earth history are amphibians. And that seems a little counterintuitive because we tend to think of amphibians as bellwethers of, environmental degradation today, but they have survived every mass extinction since the Devonian, and they did quite well in the Triassic.
But in Gondwana, at least, this large amphibian is outmuscled by a giant reptilian predator. Erythrosuchus. To date discovered only in South Africa, it's assumed that it would have inhabited nearby Middle Triassic era Antarctica.
It is possible that this animal might have made it into Antarctica as well, and Erythrosuchus would have been one of the largest predators of its time during the Middle Triassic period.
And it was a monster, 16 feet in length, with an estimated 3-foot-long head, with longer legs and less armor than a crocodile, and teeth almost as large as those of T-Rex. This early reptile was a forerunner of the dinosaurs and the apex predator of its day. Still, a group of snapping Antarctosuchus is a force to be reckoned with. This great predator occupies a niche for which his time is running out. Quietly but surely, the dinosaurs begin to evolve. Small at first. Erythrosuchus's days are numbered, as the next great extinction event is coming. Although it's not the end for some amphibians.
Temnospondylus, which is the major group to which Antarctosuchus belongs, some people believe that actually modern amphibians like frogs and salamanders actually come from within Temnospondylus. So in some sense, Temnospondylus are still around with us, but these big, large amphibians are something that passed away and mostly had their heyday in the Triassic.
Around this time, the fossil record showed a new extinction event. This marked the boundary between the Triassic and the Jurassic periods.
At the end of the Triassic period, about 200 million years ago, we lost maybe as much as 70% of all life.
The cause is largely a mystery.
It's one of the lesser known mass extinctions because dinosaurs survived it. So some of the earliest dinosaurs that were around then made it past that extinction because the end of the Triassic took out a lot of their so-called competition. So the success of the dinosaurs may be just happenstance from that mass extinction way back in the late Triassic.
This, the fourth major extinction event to affect Earth since the beginning of life, allowed the rise of the dinosaurs, seeing them become the dominant land animals on Earth. As Earth recovered, life on Gondwana's most southern continents was different from other lands. One of the big questions Nate and his team are still trying to answer is how the creatures of Antarctica also survived in the long polar nights. Unlike the plants, animals need to conserve energy in a completely different way. With so few expeditions to this part of the world, time is against them finding these answers. Back to Shackleton Glacier. Luckily, this season the weather has been kind to them, allowing them to spend more time in the field uncovering clues to the mysteries of polar vertebrates. But this frozen desert is the toughest place to dig for fossils on the Earth. With little erosion in Antarctica, they have to carefully look for chance traces on the surface of the frozen rocks. Once located, the paleontologists use power saws to extract them.
The first one that I noticed walking past this slope is a foot. And so we have a hind foot here, and it's pretty much articulated. So it's as it would be arranged in life. So what I'm working on here is the early reptile relative called Procolophon, which is kind of a burrowing sort of, small-sized animal. So this is a kind of a refugee animal that fled from lower latitudes in South Africa to higher latitudes here in Antarctica.
Procolophon is a type of primitive reptile that's similar in size to the Gila monster, a modern reptile that stalks our deserts today.
This whole block that we've cut out here contains a kind of jumble of bones, and essentially what we'll do is sort of clean this up, take this, put it in a backpack, lug it back to the helicopter site, and catalog it back in the Shackleton camp.
Just get one of the big packs and schlep it over.
Yeah.
Studying a small reptile like Procolophon can lead to some big discoveries. Could early reptiles have some features that may help science understand how some Antarctic animals survived the long polar nights? How could they navigate in the dark and catch enough food to survive? If you brought an ancient reptile to life, what secrets could it tell? Back in New Zealand, there's almost such a creature. splitting from Gondwana 80 million years ago left a small group of animals alive today with a very ancient lineage. The Tuatara, an extremely rare reptile that lives quietly in the temperate forests of this southern Pacific country. It's the only living member of an archaic reptilian order that emerged in the Middle Triassic, 250 million years ago. New Zealand now lies 3,000 miles farther north, far from its days at a polar latitude. Could it have features today that reveal how its ancestors survived back then? In St. Bathans, on the South Island of New Zealand, paleontologists have discovered the oldest example of Tuatara fossils.
We found three pieces of Tuatara-like jaw. They're just tiny little things a few millimeters long, but you can see the teeth clearly, and they're actually identical to modern-day Tuatara. So we presume they are actually ancestral to modern-day Tuatara. And it suggests that the Tuatara has had a very long history in this country.
These ancient Tuatara teeth show that they sliced their food up like a steak knife, rather than swallowing whole, like nearly all reptiles. Its ancestors in the Triassic could have had a much more varied diet with the ability to chew their food. Perhaps a useful survival adaptation in the dark forests of the polar winter. But it's the modern Tuatara's secretive feature on its head which could be the most significant clue. Curiously, the Tuatara has a third eye obscured by skin called the parietal eye. It has its own cornea, a retina, and a lens, and a degenerated nerve connection to the brain. This third eye in other animals acts as a calendar. It can sense days getting longer and nights getting shorter, and be used to schedule reproduction. It could also be involved in thermoregulation, which warm-blooded mammals have, but reptiles don't, to help it through the sunless polar winter. But could such adaptations have existed in Antarctic creatures to help them through the long polar winter? Turning to a living creature for clues is due to the enormous challenges of finding enough evidence in the Antarctic fossil record. In the 1960s and 70s, scientists working sporadically made discoveries that revealed an intriguing hidden prehistoric world, but no evidence of dinosaurs. Maybe dinosaurs couldn't adapt and live in the polar region. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
It took many expeditions to actually recover and prepare all these bones. You got a lot of bad weather in that area, freeze-thaw of the rock surface that made collection difficult. So sometimes it can take a long time from discovery to naming of one of these dinosaurs.
This was certainly true of Antarctica. In 1986, fossils were discovered on an Antarctic island. Scientists didn't know what it was, and it was stored away in Argentina for future research. Painstakingly over time, they gradually put together the pieces of the puzzle. In 2006, it was officially named and accepted as a dinosaur, making it the first to be discovered, although named retrospectively. It was an armor-plated plant eater that was a close relative of Ankylosaurus. These dinosaurs roamed North America in the late Cretaceous 70 million years ago and are famous for their club-like tails. This 20-foot-long Antarctic relative was named Antarctopelta and must have dispersed down through South America to Antarctica when they were still connected. So dinosaurs had either migrated to or evolved on Antarctica after all, with or without polar adaptations. We know that dinosaurs emerged after the fourth extinction event at the end of the Triassic to become the dominant species in the Jurassic period, including in Antarctica. But why? A major change in the climate occurred around the start of the Jurassic, which produced the perfect environment for the emerging dinosaur plant eaters that would become abundant. The rich ecosystem was created by the Great Split of the continents 180 million years ago. Laurasia, the northern section, parts company with the southern section, Gondwana, with Antarctica the most southern part. Between the two landmasses, a sea floods in. This, the Tethys Sea, draws moisture to the land and changes the climate around the world into a hot, humid jungle planet. The Jurassic. But even with the abundant dinosaur fossils from the Jurassic period worldwide, it continues to be a Herculean challenge to identify fossils embedded in Antarctica's frozen rock. Often the fossils are so badly preserved, a prehistoric animal is identified only through its teeth. Teeth get preserved better than many other parts of the animal, like this rare discovery of amphibian teeth in a 2011 expedition.
When I came here, I was excavating a piece of bone from this position here, and I thought this was fossil wood. You can see this very dark material. And as I was excavating here, this little block dropped off, and to reveal the most beautiful set of amphibian teeth. Here, clearly, we've got a nice specimen with its teeth in, and so this is definitely a collectible one.
This early Jurassic creature was also discovered by a single upper post canine. They were named Tritylodonts. Warm-blooded, they may have possessed some sort of fur, a proto-mammal, and a hint of what was to come. Unfortunately for Tritylodonts, they lived at the same time as Antarctica's apex carnivore. Cryolophosaurus, the T-Rex of Antarctica. In the next episode, the discovery of Antarctica's first giant carnivore. And fleet-footed herbivores. The appearance of the largest dinosaurs of all time. While the ice continent reveals clues to some of Earth's greatest mysteries. How dinosaurs survived the polar darkness. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all. Are birds the living descendants of dinosaurs?
Thanks.